Great Scott! Great Scott! Great Scott!
Hello everyone, and welcome to a feisty edition of Great Scott. I'm Scotty V. Thanks for watching. So, from time to time, we here at the Great Scott Show get letters. Donovan Hunter writes, "Who's your favorite Lois Lane? For me, it's a toss-up between Terry Hatcher and Dana Delaney. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to cover the Lois Lanes that just come to me off the top of my head. The first Lois Lane that I remember, obviously, I think most of us fans remember, is Noelle Neal from the George Reeves Adventures of Superman series. Now, this isn't because I was old enough to watch the show when it was on, but it's because I saw it in reruns. It used to be on, I think, at like 4 o'clock when I would come home from school in the 80s, and I would run home and try to make it. Or sometimes it was on at 7 a.m. Sometimes they'd run the Batman show, but it would go back and forth sometimes between the two of these. And Noelle Neal, of course, was Lois Lane to George Reeves' Superman. Noelle Neal also played her in the serials that were out released in movie theaters at that time. I guess you'd pay like a penny or a nickel or a dime or something, and you'd go and see each chapter, and those chapters were starred in by Kirk Allen, and of course Noelle Neal got to play her there. Now, when the show came to TV, the first season of the show starred Phyllis Coates as Lois Lane, whom I personally prefer over Noelle Neal, but of course Noelle Neal played her from seasons 2 through 5 and played her in those movies, and is much more well known to Superman fandom as Lois Lane. And it's not Noelle's fault. The reason, I think, is the first season of the George Reeves series was really serious. It was dark. It was kind of detective noir. They took it seriously, and then from season 2 onward, they kind of handed down an edict that it was going to be more a family show, more a children-oriented show. And Lois, Noelle Neal, came back on board, and she was always kind of a sillier Lois, I thought. There were goofy situations. They all, they had the tongue-in-cheek humor, which they added in a lot more of after the first season. And so for me, that lost a little bit of the coolness of the show, and therefore the coolness of Lois. And so that's why that situation for me goes to Phyllis Coates. But then as we move on, we have some Superman shows on voiceover Superman shows, like cartoon shows. I'm not going to talk about them right now because I think it's pretty difficult with just a voice. Although the Lois Lane on the Superman animated series, Dana Delaney, as Donovan says, was voiced really well. The problem with that show for me was that there was never really any growth. Lois and Clark never became any closer. Lois and Superman never became any closer. They had occasional flights together, and Clark was just a tertiary character that became Superman and did some stuff. They never really explored the romance, and we never really found out that much about Lois, although the voice was done pretty well. Moving a little before that, though, Donovan also mentions Terry Hatcher from the Lois and Clark show. And Lois on the Lois and Clark show, I think, was extremely fleshed out. We saw who she really was. She started off as this chick who didn't take any bull from anybody, and was feisty, and the Lois Lane reputation that we all know and we all love to some extent or another. And as the show moved on, of course, she and Clark got closer. The romance grew. They ended up married. Questionably, the show was very silly, very campy, very corny, very cheesy, and too much so for my liking, ultimately. Although I did like that cast the most out of all casts of all Superman shows, simply because I thought the chemistry was really right, and I thought they really developed relationships on that show, which sometimes is very important. Some of the storylines, some of the villains, some of the Superman action, not so great. But I thought the Lois Lane, Clark Kent dynamic with them together, and them growing in love and learning about each other, and that kind of relationship was the best we've seen. Smallville, of course, had a number of years with Lois Lane. That would be Erica Durance. I think she came on in season 4. When Clark didn't really know who he was, and she didn't know who Clark was yet, and hadn't seen any Superman-type action. She helped him out of a cornfield and then became part of his life, eventually moving into the Kent farm for a while, being around from that point forward. They work together at the Daily Planet. They eventually fall in love. She falls for the Blur. There's some stuff going on. She eventually figures out that he is the Blur, but at the same time, she was already loving Clark, which I love. I love when they do that, where Clark's the guy that Lois falls for, because to me that makes it much less like she is falling for Superman because he's Superman, because who wouldn't, right? So I like the idea that they went that route, and then she knew the secret, and that was good too, because a lot of people wonder how could she not know. Which brings us to Man of Steel, where Amy Adams is in on the secret from the very beginning. Clark tells her right at the beginning who he is. When she meets him, she figures it out. She finds him. She tracks him down. She ends up in the cemetery where he's at his father's grave, and then from that point forward, she helps with the story at that point. The Christopher Reeve movies with Margot Kidder, of course, the original films. A lot of people have those as their favorite Superman movies. Christopher Reeve is their favorite Superman. He was great. The movies were great in their time, and still great now for what they are. I find them, again, very campy and very cheesy, but fun to watch. A lot more fun than maybe Man of Steel, because Man of Steel was taken very seriously. A lot of crazy things happened in the movie. It's a little darker, a little more serious, a little sadder in tone, whereas Superman's very light. There's some humor in there, and a lot of cheese, and the Lex Luthor cheese, and also didn't feel like the relationship developed much. See, here's the thing. For me, TV is always going to have it over film, because on TV, assuming the show lasts a while, you get 1 season, 2 seasons, 3 seasons, 5 seasons, 10 seasons to flesh out characters, to learn about characters, to see characters grow and to go through character arcs and story arcs. You learn that much more about them, and they seem to develop much more realistic, meaningful relationships over time. Whereas in Man of Steel, they're kissing very quickly, and people go, it doesn't make any sense. I've had people complain to me that they shouldn't be kissing already, although I think they were through some pretty harrowing things together, and it made them grow closer much more quickly. And from the beginning, Lois was empathetic toward his situation, and didn't want to expose him and didn't want to use him for sensationalism. So I think they had a connection there, and I think we all know that Lois and Superman end up together, Lois and Clark end up together, so it's a lot easier to buy when something like that happens. But in the original Superman movies, I didn't really see much of a relationship. I saw a woman who was infatuated with a god-like being, kind of fall for him, and I saw him as this farm boy, for whatever reason, like her, but I think because they knew that we needed to get there, they just did it. But it didn't really happen organically, which on TV they have time for that to occur. In Man of Steel, you could say it didn't really happen organically either, because they got to it really fast, although I see the threads of a better connection there, some more chemistry there, something that I could buy a lot more readily. Now, when it was announced that Amy Adams was going to play Lois Lane, the big uproar was she has red hair. You can see in the picture behind me, oftentimes in the comics, Lois would have some red tint to her hair. My favorite Lois Lane overall, because of the relationship, because of the time we had to learn about her, just because of her cuteness and her likability and her sexiness and her sass, is Terry Hatcher from Lois and Clark. Thanks everybody for watching, and remember, I'm not just a girl reporter, I'm also Superman's girlfriend.